Good morning, everyone, and thank you all for joining us. Welcome to the Earning Curve. The Earning Curve is a new platform in webinars and different from other webinars you may have attended in the past. You, the audience, drives all the panel questions. My name is Marianne Biangardi, and I'm in charge of marketing and sales at Schmersahl Treloar. I'm also the moderator on the Earning Curve, so I get to see you every couple weeks. Today's topic is how to build meaningful accountability into the sales function. Having an accountability structure in place for your sales team is critical for success. Today, you will discover why. It is very important to manage your top performers to the same and hold them to the same standard as your other team members. We will also talk about setting high standards for your sales team that can be used as benchmarks for success. Since all of you drive the panel, we need you to send us some questions. In order to send us your questions, find the thought bubble icon at the bottom of your viewing screen. Type your questions in there and we will get them answered. Let me get started with some introductions. We have 5 expert panelists with us today. Today, our anchor panelist is Christy Jones from Sales Acceleration Group. Kristie has 19 plus years as a sales leader. She helps founders increase revenue through improved strategy, process, and people. A few fun facts. She's interviewed Dennis Hopper. She's a true crime junkie, and her Uber rating is 4.96, which is 0.3 higher than her brother's, and that's all that matters. So she might be a little competitive. Ryan Bretsch is up next. Ryan is the Vice President of Sales Enablement at Spoke Marketing. Ryan is a founding creator of the Earning Curve. A fun fact about Ryan, Ryan's name is a linguistic anomaly consisting of 7 letters, but only 1 syllable. An outdoor enthusiast, he loves to travel and backpack and climb the mountains in Wyoming and other fun adventures. We also have David Schenberg. David is a sales development manager at Worldwide Technology. David has over 30 years in creative design, marketing, live events, entrepreneurship, and sales strategy. Fun fact about David, when travel halted during the pandemic, he used the time at home to start creating Shenny's Not So Simple syrup. And now he's sold $22,000 in sales. He assists, part of that goes to raise funds for local food pantries. And the update is it will now be made in a commercial kitchen, so you can find it in stores soon, which is pretty exciting. Next, we have Doug Hall, President and founder of D Advocate and Associates. Douglas is the go-to expert for navigating digital virtual transformations for organizations, teams, and individuals. He has been helping me all week, and he does before every show to see if the speaker is correct. So he's great with all that tech stuff. He has been dedicated to helping all of us brave this new virtual world with a simple and sincere approach and adopting technology as a tool rather than an alternative. And fun fact, I mean, Doug is just fun in general. So what can I say? But he does have a super cool cat. He really loves his cat. So I always see him in the background of some of the videos. Kim Baker is next. Kim is with Vivid Performance Group. Kim is an award-winning sales representative, sales manager, and leader in global sales training and development. She has 25 years of sales experience in manufacturing, medical diagnostics and devices, IT, and other professional services. She works with organizations to hire, assemble, and train the right individuals. Fun facts about Kim is that she loves a thrill, and she's been skydiving, sailplaning, taking trapeze lessons. An interesting historical fact about Kim that I just learned is that her ancestors were actually represented by Abraham Lincoln, and they won a case against the railroad. So now we can go ahead and get started. So Kristie, let's start with you as the anchor panelist. Why is meaningful accountability so important for the sales function?
Marianne, thanks so much for kicking this off. You know, accountability is something that we don't talk as probably enough about. We talk a lot about metrics. Sales is a very objective sport, as I call it. And I think the accountability piece is somewhat more subjective. And I think the reason why it's important is, you know, there's several reasons, but top performers expect to be held accountable. and they expect the coworkers to be held accountable and those in the other departments. So in order to attract and retain top talent, having an accountability culture is going to be critical. I say one of the main reasons that I like having an accountability culture is it makes your life as the leader easier, right? When you've been able to outline expectations, communicate those effectively, and kind of lay out how we're going to be measuring those expectations, what the consequences of those might be. And you do that when things are neutral, right? A lot of people wait till things have gone south and then all of a sudden decide to hold people accountable to things that either A, they didn't know they were being held accountable for, or didn't really understand the impact of those expectations not being met or what the accountability situation is. So in general, there are a lot of positive reasons to hold people accountable. And the other one I say is, hey, listen, you might have missed your revenue target in 2020 and you might not have been the only one. But what if the difference between hitting your revenue target during pandemic and not hitting it was laying out clear expectations and holding people accountable to those?
Awesome. Thank you, Kristie. Anybody else want to chime in? Or I can just go to the next question. All right, hang on. Let me grab the next chat question here. So let's go to the next question here is, what are some examples of things I can ask all salespeople to do, regardless of how tenured or successful they are? David,
I could probably chime in on that. So I think so from my experience, I think there's a big difference between retiring your quota and actually putting profitable deals together that are good for your company. And so I think a lot of the things that we ask salespeople to do are very systematic. Maybe you use Salesforce, maybe you have certain pipeline information that needs to get entered in. A lot of the things that we need to be asking salespeople to do are to share some information about what's in their pipeline so that the other areas of the business can also be prepared to support and deliver what's being sold down the line. I think there's almost like a real disconnect between I'm out there hunting and killing and dragging things home, and you people just need to deliver it. And that disconnect usually shows up in the form of, we had no idea that you were out there selling that thing you're selling, and now we're ill prepared to deliver it, which is going to impact your ability to get paid. And so there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes operationally that I think we maybe don't do a good job of telling our salespeople or training them to understand and do, and why they need to do it.
Marianne, would you repeat that question so I can jump on this without making sure I didn't derail the whole conversation? Was it something we can ask them to tell us to stay accountable?
Sure. What are some examples of things I can ask all salespeople to do, regardless of how tenured or successful they are?
And I think the big piece here is that, and a lot of times I find I'm usually saying the opposite to my sales teams of talk to me in numbers. I don't need a story about every deal, but I think when it comes to when you're doing more of a review or after when you're looking at pipe, it's important to say, all right, these are our numbers. Now tell me a story about somebody that bought our product or our service that we helped. Give me something unique, because selling is helping. So I think a big piece of accountability is not just being accountable to your numbers, to your targets, to your pipeline, but being accountable to your customers. So I think that there's a unique opportunity to have them tell you stories about those experiences that aren't just tied to the metrics.
I think particularly during the pandemic, I asked my leaders and founders that I work with to hold expectations and accountabilities sometimes over some different things. Like one of them was work schedule, right? I mean, not we're not working 8 to 5 or 9 to 6 or whatever anymore, right? I mean, we were teaching our children at home. We were potentially caring for aging parents. We were doing things differently. And so I asked my founders to reach out to all of their employees and say, what can I expect from you as far as work schedule is concerned? The other thing was communication that I don't normally put on the accountability expectations list. How am I best to communicate with you during this situation where we're not in the office together anymore? Is it Slack? Is it email? Is it texting on the phone? And so I think when you talk about what should we be asking about, not just top performers, but all people, but some of those really basic things I think we missed sometimes during the pandemic. Can you let me know if you're not going to be online by 9 in the morning? just, it was really little things. And I had a lot of communication expectation conversations. What's the best way to reach you? What hours can I count on you being online? And so think about, again, like we all think sales is the easiest department to manage, I say, because it is such an objective sport. But it isn't always just about the number of calls or the new deals you put in your pipeline or pipeline hygiene, which are all expectations that we would have as sales leaders. But I think right now, there's some other expectations that are happening, as well as talking about how are you doing self-care? My expectation is when you need to take time off, that you take time off, right? So that things don't get out of hand. And if you need a half day on Friday, or you need a Friday and a Monday, and even if you're not going anywhere, take that time off.
Kristie, you bring up a really interesting point around this concept of a working agreement and how that working agreement changes. So this concept actually comes from the software development arena, in that as teams form around a development project, they create a working agreement that establishes a number of things, including availability hours, preferred communication practices, what happens if somebody takes time off? Are we having a weekly stand-up meeting? Like, what are the things that we're going to do? The cool thing about putting a working agreement together with your sales team is if somebody misbehaves or steps out of line and it impacts the team, there's two things that occur. The first one is the rest of the team sees that happening and is expecting you to respond in some way to correct it or advise it. The second thing that happens is you don't want to necessarily call out an individual person in front of a group and demean them. And so what you can do is you can refer back to the working agreement and say, hey, is this still working? Is this still a valid working agreement that we all are available for a 7:30 stand-up, or we're all available to enter this information into the system and tag our deals the way they're being tagged? Because the company needs that and needs to count on it. It's like a service level agreement you'd have with your customer, but instead you have it with each other. So maybe think about putting one of those together for your team if you feel like things have gotten out of control.
And
that's exactly where I was going, was just saying something to the fact of knowing what's working for them. I mean, but before COVID, we had systems. We knew when people walked in the office. We knew when people took lunch. Now people might be working in their pajamas at 3 a.m. and still getting more done. So they can be accountable to the metrics, to the deliverability, but they might not be as aligned as they once were. So trying to find what works for them while they're still able to deliver. And then sometimes those meetings change, because everything does. The only constant is change. And that was just a warm up for Kim, because she's probably got something smarter to say.
I don't know about that, but thanks. So, accountability, we shouldn't look at this as a broad brush or a one size fits all. Your accountability really needs to live in some sort of a structure that supports the needs of the business. And, accountability is going to look different, perhaps preparing for a product launch, in a product launch, a heavily competitive situation. It's going to look different if you're in a back order situation with your product. I've been there. It's going to look different if you are exploiting a competitive opportunity. And so it needs to serve the business, and we need to be able to define the behaviors. And something that Kristie said earlier really came to mind. It's making the implicit explicit. It's amazing how many times sales managers think, oh, well, they should just know to do this or that. That's implicit to you, but you have to make it explicit, right? So accountability is all about behaviors, and the behaviors need to serve the business, but they also need to serve your employees. And that's really, I think, what we're talking about with COVID and how that changes.
So I think you'll see some recurring themes here with my answer. The first would be, have an objective metric standard and set clear expectations. I mean, I think one of the biggest mistakes that sales managers, do is they set, vague or ambiguous, expectations. And then when it comes time to have an accountability conversation, you can't really have an effective accountability conversation, because there's disagreement on what the standard is. I think the second thing is to remember for sales managers is that sales accountability is a conversation. It's not direction. And so the goal in having a conversation is to enroll your sales professionals in accountability and not direct them toward accountability. And then the last thing is follow through. And I think this kind of is a a repeat of, of some of the things some of the other panelists have said, is it's about coaching the behaviors, not just the numbers. And I think, one of the fallback positions of a lot of sales managers is to reference the numbers, because they don't take the time to follow through, observe the sales, professionals' selling behaviors. So when it comes time to have, conversations, the only thing that they can point to is the numbers. That's a conversation that is not going to enroll salespeople as far as an accountability culture.
I think a big
Marianne.
accountability is vulnerability as well. I mean, you have to be able to ask for help. And a big issue with salespeople is they don't admit when they need help. And that accountability to both sides of you, whether it's your team, who's handling the deliverables, or account management, as well as marketing, bringing it in, and in a time like this where people are a little bit more isolated, is saying, drowning, somebody needs help, it's like drowning, and drowning is quiet. And then you start pulling people in, because it just starts to, becomes a whole chain reaction. So knowing to stand up and say, hey, I'm struggling here, or I'm working on a big project, I'm not going to be able to get those numbers in, can somebody give me a hand, really develops, that reciprocal accountability in the office.
So the concept of sales in general is usually very big rocks that have to be broken down. Most sales, I think for most of the people who are probably watching this or participating in this, your sales are complex. That's not everybody, but I think a lot of us get involved in things that are a little bit more complex than just picking a product off a shelf. And so salespeople who are trying to manage complex deals need to be able to have something that they can achieve on a daily basis. And so anything that you can do to help them break down their work, or create there are the big metrics, right? Anything associated with pipeline and deal closure and whatever, and numbers, those are the big, obviously, metrics by which people get compensated. But there's a layer below that I think you can really look into that would be considered leading indicators. Mm-hmm. And those leading indicators could be things just like the number of calls you make a week, the number of contracts that are up for renewal, some of the marketing activities that are going on for lead generation or lead conversion. And so if you're looking to coach a group of salespeople who are working at multiple levels, sometimes those leading indicators are much like the working agreements that we talked about a few minutes ago. They're universal. Those leading indicators are the little smaller dials of the business that you as a manager can turn in order to see performance occur on a daily and weekly basis, so that you don't wind up having these difficult conversations at the end of a month or a quarter because you weren't adjusting the business along the way.
Yeah, I see a lot of us on this panel nodding our heads that we are so enthusiastically agreeing with David. It's this concept of leading indicators just can't be overglossed. It really does create the day-to-day behaviors, and it creates the natural conversations between manager and a rep. If you didn't get those calls made, it's simply, okay, what got in your way? How can I help you? How will you commit to getting back on track, right? So just a real natural day in and day out. I think what's really important for any organization is really to define what we mean by accountability. From the world I come from doing personality and other type of psychometric assessments, I'll read to you how we define it. It's someone who accepts responsibility for one's actions regardless of outcome. And we can profile personality behaviors to that, and I can give a lot of input or insight, but every organization has to really lay that out, because if I have my own definition of accountability and I don't share it, guess what? My sales rep or anybody else, they're guaranteed to not meet my standard. And how unfair is that? So accountability, communication, shared understanding really creates the collaboration and dynamic that we need to produce results.
I love it. Actions and outcomes is leading and lagging. And I think that, to go back to David, and as well as the carry through there, it's without the leading indicators, where is the accountability? I always use dieting as an example. Your lagging is how much weight you might have lost, or your body mass index, but you're accountable to the steps you took, or the exercises you did, or the calories you cut. That's where the accountability comes in the actions that lead to those results. So speaking to just the results isn't going to still nearly as much accountability as speaking to the actions that got there. What did you do today? How many did it take? And you're not going to be able to measure and learn. If you're just doing a bunch of random stuff at the end of the month saying, hey, I hit my goals, I have no idea why, then how are you going to improve? So that's really where that lies.
Or how are you going to repeat? So if you got there and you don't know how you got there, that's even worse, because there's a good chance that if you had a good quarter or month as a sales performer and you didn't do it in any with any methodology, yeah, you're going to be in the bottom of the heap next month, and you're not sure how you got there. So I mean, I totally love the dieting analogy, or the putting in the work that attributed to the goal, because there's also another thing to think about is there are salespeople who make their number and basically blaze a trail of burnt people in the path of getting it done, because they've burnt everyone out in legal and finance and compliance with their last minute and ridiculous requests, or they've burnt up all the profit in the deal because they gave away a bunch of stuff to retire their revenue number. But the GP on the deal is awful, which means the company's actually losing money or hurting by delivering the business they've sold. So there's plenty of that to look at too.
Well, the one thing that I would like to add from that comment is, let's look at the sales accountability, the definition. So sales accountability is just not the individual accountability to the sales number, right? It's also that individual's contribution to the team. And there's accountability not just to the individual meeting their quota or on target earnings OTE number, but it's also, if that person's doing it at the expense of other team members, how does that benefit the organization?
Marianne, I think something else to add here is, and I'm pivoting just a bit, but I say, just like I say to sales reps, discovery is a process, not an event. So too are expectation conversations, right? And so I think sometimes people go, 2021, January 2nd, let's all sit down individually and map out the year and set our expectations. But business needs are changing all the time. We know, we saw that no greater than we did last year, when literally you could have had expectation conversations potentially on a daily basis. And so I think, and I'm also talking a lot about transparency. We haven't brought that topic up here yet, but we talked about how holding people accountable and how to do that. That has to be part of the expectation conversation. You also have to know how I'm inspecting what I expect. Am I using the CRM system? Am I going to pop in and sit in on calls? Am I going to, join you for a demo or a negotiation conversation? Am I going to talk to other coworkers or other colleagues in other departments to get some feedback? So I think there's so many layers to this, but I think transparency, and then the importance of thinking that this is not a one-time event or at the beginning of every quarter. This isn't, this is a process, and making sure that you're reading people, and that when business needs are shifting, or even the rep's personal needs are shifting, right? Or your needs as a leader. Sometimes we don't even talk about that, but I think the transparency part's really important. I also think the fact that this is not I did it, I put it in writing, I pushed the send button, we're good, right? Doesn't work that way.
Kristie, I really appreciate your reference.
Start at the same time. I'm out. Go.
Mine's short, I promise. I really appreciate how, Kristie, I think what you're embedding in this set of comments is reflecting the culture of the company in the direction that you set. So if you work for a company that is known to have a feedback culture, then you need to make sure to bake that feedback mechanism into your expectations, so that if there is a team member who feels like they're being mistreated on the salesperson's path to the top of the heap, that there's an outlet for that person to speak up and say that they're being, unduly treated and maybe unduly compensated as well, because they're carrying the heavy buckets of water for the salesperson who's doing it the wrong way, and yet still making their number. So ownership or leadership is saying, but this person is one of our top sales leaders, and yes, they're doing it the wrong way, and the backs of our operational people are wearing out because they're not doing it the right way.
So David, I have a question here. So the question is, what do I actually do with the sales performers who make their numbers without using the processes? What do you do with that?
Well, that's a tough decision to make, because if you're in a situation where you haven't tied compensation to proper performance, it's difficult to go back retroactively and say, hey, everybody, starting on X date, you're only going to get paid on the deals that you properly use this process to do. And you might get people who will threaten to, quote, leave the company because they're your best salespeople. So this can't be a double-edged sword where you only use it as part of a PIP, a performance improvement plan. This has to be something everybody does. And so there's no easy way to start up something if it doesn't currently exist. But if you're having this kind of fatigue across your organization, or you're having to add more operational staff to make up for the things that salespeople just aren't or won't do, then you really have to look at this as a business owner and say, can we afford to continue to operate like this? Or is this really hurting our company? If there's real damage being done, then you have to take action. You have to, that transparency that got brought up a few minutes ago, that's where transparency becomes extremely important to your top salespeople, because if they get frustrated and leave, they're going to run into the same challenge at another company. It's not that you were harder on them than someone else would be. It's always going to get to the, is this right for the business? Is this a profitable way to do business or not? And that tough conversation has to be had.
Yeah, the flip side of that is, I always say to leaders, make sure you've got executive support for accountability culture, right? Because when you've set expectations and now need to hold a top performer accountable to not hitting those, and all of a sudden you get a call from the B level or the C level saying, I don't know what's going on down there on the 3rd floor, but if you think Todd isn't going to be around next week because of X, you're sorely mistaken. And so another piece that I think gets missed sometimes is making sure that your executive team understands what accountability culture and the sales team means for you and for your team. And who's going to have your back when, I say, ethical and character and integrity issues are non-negotiables until all of a sudden somebody calls you, right? Somebody from the ivory tower calls and says, hey, word got out. And so you have to clear, like, just like we're setting expectations with our employees, you have to do the same thing up, right? Managing up. And the last thing you want to do from a safe face perspective, think about loss of credibility. If all of a sudden you're holding people accountable to what you said you were going to, but in the back room over here, we're having a different discussion.
I think that to get global or universal alignment when it comes to that too, it's to emphasize the benefits rather than the best practices. When it comes to putting things into the CRM, when we look and see how does this affect the entire organization at large? And you can, and every business is different and every sales system is different, but you can monetize, proper behavior. You can bonus people that did it the right way. But if you could show how doing it the right way is actually benefiting everyone, then you're going to get buy-in from the top down. And eventually those dinosaurs will slowly either acclimate or they won't be the top seller in the organization, especially if you bifurcate those sales forces for a little while and you let the hunters go out and hunt while you raise the next breed of seller.
So the thing that I was going to maybe note, with this is it's the one theme that I think you'll see is it starts with a critical thinking exercise first. You can't just go out and plan the various objectives and set various goals without understanding what it means to do that. And so what Kristie said about who is, you can't build an accountability culture. You just can't if your senior management is not enrolled in it. If they're not enrolled in what you're trying to do. It's, because you're going to be going out, even if you're taking the right actions, the right actions and accountability sometimes start with a lot of pain. And if your senior management doesn't understand what the purpose of the pain is, you're just going to get pushback, not just from the sales representatives, but also then from senior management, and then your whole thing, crumbles. And then the second thing is it starts with an understanding of what the right objectives are. It's, you can't just, go out and, to David's point, is, set a goal around a revenue number and give and then not have a compensation plan that supports, that, number one, or number two, is I've seen circumstances where people, where the sales representatives will achieve the revenue number, completely decimating the gross profit number in the process. And who does that serve? Absolutely no one. So you really have to start with, understanding, what are the objectives of the company, what are the goals, and then do a validation process to ensure that those are the right goals.
I'd be curious to know, and there's no way to poll our audience today, but I've been involved in conversations where we're working with an OEM partner. Let's say it's Dell Computer, and Dell's compensated their sales reps on revenue, and we've compensated our sales reps on gross profit. So when we're going together to sell to a customer, what the OEM is willing to do versus what we're willing to do can look very different. And so in some cases, you're not just managing one sales team, you're managing the combination of multiple sales teams that need to work together in order to put a successful and profitable deal together, not just for this particular year or quarter, but this could affect a multi-year, software business or any other part of aspects of follow-along services. Not to mention, some customers will write contracts based on adoption so that they don't wind up with shelfware. So as you get into these more complex deals, there's a lot more operational things that go on behind the scenes. And so that's where I think what you're talking about, and this concept of transparency and just the culture of openness around putting profitable business together, that complexity requires such an underpinning of systems and processes that you can't help but engage your sales teams in this process of, look, this is how we put good deals together. And I think the key is you have to incent with compensation strategies at multiple levels with multiple kickers, that if you do this one thing really well, yeah, you're going to make some money. But if you want to really tap into the higher levels of pay, you need to do these other things too. And you need to do them well. And here's how we're going to be measuring them. And that complex deals call for complex compensation strategies.
And honestly, if you're giving your salespeople the ability to affect the GP, you need to be at least, putting in your formula something that, adjusts for that. If I can cost the company 10% by adjusting my price point, then I should be not getting the same commission that I would if I didn't. Now those numbers change, but that should be, considered in your sales formulas.
It might be as simple as just the approval process. I mean, I know I'm not going to give away any secrets here, but I know within our organization, if you want approval to sell a deal below a certain GP, you have to involve an executive. That they need to be aware that you're about to do something that has an impact on the company that they may not agree to.
Well, and the more that we empower with pricing corridors or other types of things where the sales rep has autonomy, they have authority, they understand the trade-offs, and they're provided that, this gets to, we know what they have to do, what latitude can we give them in terms of the how, because that really does start to drive loyalty and job satisfaction. We all want, it's well known, we all want to have autonomy in our role, and we all want to have a say. So a situation like David's talking about, having, whether it is what kind of marketing support, if we've got dollars, if it's pricing, there are numerous things, numerous industries. I work in some industries that are, pharmaceutical, medical device, and it's so compliant and so limited. And the accountability is reinforced and woven through by the government. I want to come back to a couple things that were said earlier in terms of when Kristie said, your accountability, you have to have executive leadership and support as you define what accountability is. Anytime we work with any type of culture work, we define what it is and what it isn't, right? That's something that's really important. What is accountability not? Because accountability will start to feel to some people like micromanaging. Well, what's micromanaging to me may not be to Kristie. So this is where, again, being transparent, having these big discussions and even involving salespeople. We all like to have control of our work life, all of our lives, right? But we like that. So enrolling the salespeople in terms of what's accountability, what would feel like too much to you, what feels like, what would you say is too little to make you productive and us effective? Now, you're just taking input. And then as you design things, if for the sales force, you're saying, we took your input and here's how we wove it in. And you know what? Then you start to get buy-in because you allowed me to be part of it. And, you know, kind of pull back the kimono to the degree that you can, that you explain to sales reps, here's the borders, here's the corridors, here's where the lines we have to color inside. But to the degree you can, give them as much space to color as possible. The other thing about accountability is when you get really specific about what it is and what it isn't, then we know the behaviors that we are measuring. Be prepared to wield it equally. And what this means, and I've worked in numerous sales organizations where managers had their favorites. Well, that just doesn't work, because if I see that so-and-so doesn't perform to a standard and gets away with it, there goes trust in my leader, in my organization. That is putting, you know, my paper's, you know, going to be on the street. So the other part of this is legal. I always feel like I want to bring in the legal standpoint, because if I'm terminated for not performing, but yet I can prove somebody else also didn't, and again, sales, it's so darn objective and obvious. So that's the other thing about is, if you're going to go really strong accountability, be prepared to wield it both ways. And if a manager can't, in his heart of hearts, say, yes, I am willing to fire my best friend rep, my favorite rep, because he or she didn't do something, if they can't say it, your accountability will fail. The final thing I'll say too is talking about motivating, and when we go about profiling and assessing salespeople, different salespeople have different motivators, and be aware that some salespeople could be motivated not always by money or always by the highest kicker. Maybe they are motivated to have more influence or power. Maybe they want to be on a task team. Maybe they want to do something cross-functional. Maybe they want to be some sort of a trainer. So just, I know we tend to think salespeople, it's always money, 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 but be attuned to other motivators, and actually also career development. That might be something that would really, and because again, think about accountability, I'm demonstrating that I'm accountable. That can start to look very leader-like, right? And if somebody has that desire, so just think about different ways you can meet somebody where they are and feed into what motivates them, perhaps for accountability.
So there's 2 points I'd like to add in here. You know, the first one is about micromanaging, is, you know, because I think micromanaging kind of, you know, gets a bad rap sometimes, but there actually is such a good thing as micromanagement. But first you have to understand, you know, what the definition of that is. So I look at micromanaging as managing to the level of detail to get things to run right. And so sometimes you have to go a little bit more granular than what you would normally want to do. You know, the problem, you know, where micromanaging becomes a problem is when you're managing that granular detail unnecessarily. And that's the key difference. The second thing is on managing top performers is that you absolutely agree with all the panelists. You have to hold them to the same standard, and everybody in the organization, from the lowest performer in the, you know, sales representative on up, needs to, you know, that needs to be completely transparent. But the caveat to that is that your approach to top performers can and almost has to be, you know, different, because it's, you know, so manage the same standard, but there is flexibility for the approach and how you address top performers. And I'll leave it to other panelists to kind of, you know, riff off of that.
I keep hearing this theme of micromanaging coming up, and I feel like the biggest cause of micromanaging is a lack of macro managing, of not speaking to larger scale goals, of creating a common thread between all of your salespeople and your entire company with your culture, of looking at not just each individual deal, but how has this affected the company this quarter, whether it's margins, products, whatever. Once you've set those and you use things like dashboards and create this culture of transparency, what you have is not to get too cynical here, but you have a why, you have a driven culture that wants to achieve something greater than just wins. Then the sales are how you're tracking getting towards a bigger win. So by creating a macro environment of why do we do what we do every day? What are our goals? How are we going to get there? Then it's not about each individual deal. When it becomes more collective, it becomes more accountable.
I love everything you just said, Doug. And I put up my +1, my little +1 thing here. But I will also add that for any of you that have studied any of the Patrick Lencioni materials, made that your book that you make everybody read, there's this concept of a rallying call that an organization needs. And if you've set your rallying call to be money and just the achievement of money and making your sales and having it be like a boiler room type of, coffees for closers type of atmosphere, then you've missed the mark. And I'm not suggesting that anybody's out there doing that, but even if you unintentionally make sales and the achievement of your quota the rallying call, then you probably missed giving your people a purpose. So I go back to the culture, making sure that you've embedded the culture of the company, the why your company exists into the metrics that you're measuring. If we want to be the best at something as an organization, then how is every single group in the organization supporting that? Make that part of your culture of how you communicate what everybody's purpose is. Salespeople have a purpose to achieve this aspect of our top level goals, mission, and vision. Operations has it, marketing has it. And that way, when someone does kind of get out of line or get away from the culture of the company, again, it's like the working agreement. You can go back to the culture and you can coach that individual on how they may be stepping away from the culture of the organization, not micromanage. Why aren't you filling out your TPS report? It's how have we gotten away from the core focus of what leadership wants you to be able to do and how that could be impacting the company. And you can have those conversations from a coaching perspective, not we're putting you on high alert, which causes some people to flee.
Hey, Marianne, I wanted to pivot before as we start to wrap towards time. But we talked about the topic being managing accountability as a sales function. I want to throw out that all of the same concepts and conversations we've had today also work with prospects. So if you have a culture of accountability and you're a sales leader holding your reps accountable, there's also that opportunity to teach the accountability culture with your reps towards prospects. This eliminates some of that, well, like they said they said they'd sign it and have it returned, tomorrow's the last day of the month. I'm hoping that happens. Hope's not a strategy. But all of these same techniques that we've been talking about today as it relates to leaders and individual contributors also work with sales rep and prospect relationships too. Setting proper expectations. How will we hold them accountable? Transparency against that. Consequences for not meeting expectations. And like I said at the beginning, it's much easier if you're a sales leader to have these conversations when the forest fire is not fully engulfed. Same thing with prospects, right? That's why the Sandler upfront contract is so helpful for people who follow Sandler, because it basically says up front, here are my expectations. If at any point in time we're misaligned or this is no longer working for you, then you just need to say so. One of my favorite sales reps back in the day, who now sells God instead of software, says he went into the priesthood, but he said, my second favorite word was no. And it and he gave people permission to tell him no, right? But holding them accountable. So I just wanted to throw out that this strategy that we've been talking about today and all of the tips that we've been giving work in a lot of different ways.
That's a really good point.
What was the second favorite word? I missed it.
Second favorite word is no.
I say all the time, the second best thing a salesperson can hear is no. He gets right back to, why would you belabor a pitch or a call or a prospect if you don't have to? It's about, like I said earlier, it's about helping. If you're not interested in my product, somebody else is, and I will go help them and I'll check back in. So you just want to make sure they understand what service are we providing? What need are we fixing? What solution? Sales is definitely the fuel of the organization, but it's not why the organization exists. Unless you're in finance or felonious activities, you're really doing it for another purpose. Cash is just the driver. And if you treat sales as the lifeblood, but not the reason, then everybody sees the symbiosis between departments and organizations entirely.
I do have another question here in chat. How do I hire the right people who will thrive in this high accountability sales environment?
Kim, this is you.
Kim, let's go.
All right. So, number one is reach out to somebody who provides assessments looking specifically for sales. Now, we had a whole panel on this. So since you threw it to me, and my focus is doing a lot of assessments for hiring, definitely aligning the competency needs, personality type with the type of sales role. Is it a hunter? Is it a farmer? And it's real interesting because when we look at from a personality perspective, what creates the most accountable individuals, what personality types, sometimes it's contrary to what we find in the most successful salespeople, or sometimes it's an amplification of, we have a term we call prudence. So it's just kind of doing the right job the right way, staying out of trouble, things like that. So, someone who does those things is typically going to be accountable. Doing it too much is kind of a paralyzation by analyzation. So yeah, reach out to somebody who does these types of assessments, who can help you hire a salesperson, and be able to have a discussion with them about, here's the role, here's our competitive landscape, here's the kind of, if we have compliance issues we have to live within, here's what success looks like. And there's a lot we can do looking deeper at job competencies and really helping you kind of customize what's best for you.
I would apply on to Kim's description that there's certainly a full methodology for getting the right salespeople on the bus. But I've seen this time and time again. The organization needs to have a good strategy for onboarding these various types of salespeople into the operations so that they don't stumble around for the first 90 days to try to figure out what your process is. Because what will happen is they're feeling the pressure of delivery from day one because that's what they do. And so they'll basically do it the way they did it before, even if that's not what you want, unless you help them understand from day one, this is why we do things this way. Interested in hearing your opinions on how you've done it elsewhere. We might learn something from you. However, this is why we do what we do, and we're open to feedback. But let's make sure that you know and can see that we have a leadership vision for you to be successful, that we're doing this for your success and our success collectively.
Yeah, here's another Christyism, because Ryan loves these. But I say churn starts at implementation and turnover starts at onboarding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, the thing that I would add into this mix, to me is just a simple maxim, which is hire hard, manage soft, right? So, I've seen too many times, where the interviewer themselves is not prepared. So you get questions, like, well, I see you moved from Chicago to St. Louis. So tell me about that, right? And you only have a finite number of interview questions that you can ask in a 60-minute question. You need to make sure that every single one is going to be impactful for understanding whether or not this sales representative or sales professional is going to be able to perform in the sales environment that that they're applying to. And now is the time to ask the tough questions, because you don't want to be surprised at the end when you've hired soft and now you're finding out things, and this person is a dramatically different performer than what you expected, and unfortunately that performance is on the low end.
Yeah, I'm going to pull in onboarding, training, and accountability. So a lot of times we talk about onboarding, but onboarding and training are different. And in some types of sales roles, there's a significant amount of training that has to happen. Even certifications and things that really are critical, maybe from a safety standpoint, et cetera. So here's where this comes in. If you hire the top-notch salesperson, onboard them, but train them. And when I talk about training, you from an organization, from a sales organization, need to understand the performance of the sales rep, how they need to perform in the field to drive whatever deliverables, whatever number. And you need to understand how you design training. It's a reverse engineering process, quite frankly. You design the training. Competency is a skill or a knowledge. Proficiency is how good you are at that. So you have to, if you really, really understand the training of your product or service for a salesperson to sell, you should understand the competencies, and you should understand how quickly they will build proficiency, and you need to understand what activities will build that. Now, why am I saying that? Because you want to hold somebody accountable in their early onboarding and, let's say, training. You got to have to hold them accountable to the skill that you've trained them to, that they can demonstrate, right? So I would never, if Kristie comes to work for me and she's selling a product, it's capital equipment, it's a very long sales cycle, a lot of contract negotiations. And our particular product is so unique and new to Kristie, there's things she doesn't know. Well, how can I fairly hold Kristie accountable to a certain proficiency in negotiating our product in our environment if I haven't trained Kristie to that? And as I share the story, I bet that seems like a duh to you, but again, I see this so often where we think that, oh, I onboarded them, I told them to read this, I showed them that, and we conflate that erroneously with training, and then we hold somebody to a standard, this accountability, and we haven't done our job to really train them and set them up for success.
Yeah, the key word here is applied knowledge. I think what's missing from a lot of the training is repetition and applied knowledge and ridiculous things like role playing and mentorship, because we get a lot of people who we bring in who are seasoned and tenured, and we hang this kind of executive presence on them, but we haven't given them enough. And then time passes, and then there's this notion of, well, you've been here 6 months, you should be X, Y, and Z. It's like, well, maybe we failed you. Maybe we didn't actually make sure and test the application of the knowledge that we gave you, and or how you processed it, given your diversity of experience. That has, both good and bad connotations.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in on that comment to say accountability works both ways. And if you have sales representative that is underperforming, the first person that you should be looking at is you as the manager, and and making sure that you've identified the causes, that from a management perspective, that we sometimes as managers throw up hurdles without meaning to. But we still create barriers that inhibit sales representative performance. So that's one of our own accountability pieces is, are we removing barriers for the sales representative, the sales professional to be able to perform at a high level?
Well, are we setting people up for failure? I mean, again, like if you can't look in the mirror and say that you're holding yourself accountable, how on earth are you going to turn around and try to hold someone else accountable without that blowing up in your face big time? So are you taking accountability for mishires? Are you taking accountability for, poor quota attainment? Are you taking accountability for not providing ongoing training and support? So yeah, accountability is a two-way street, and you need to ask your employees, what are you expecting of me? And how can and how will I be held accountable? Because, a lot of times I feel like we've set people up for failure. And again, to Ryan's point, sometimes unknowingly or not, definitely not maliciously, but, because we were enthusiastic or because we didn't fight, push back on the executive mandate that came down from the top and say, hey, listen, I'm not sure that we're capable of doing that right now, or that that's realistic. So yeah, I mean, accountability is absolutely a two-way street, and we didn't probably spend enough time on that today either.
Yeah, I got a small little anecdote. I'll try to keep it under a minute, but I had a SDR team that was getting incredibly frustrated with having to call all the leads that were coming in. And I told them, I said, hey, you get one call a week that if you don't want to take it, I'll take it. And she said, I'll call anybody you tell me, you pick one every week. And so it came to me one of my SDRs came to me on a Friday at like 4:30 and shows me a lead. And literally the guy said he was a Nigerian diplomat or something. And I'm like, oh yeah, just go ahead and toss it as archive it or whatever. He goes, no, you're calling him. Turned out he was a Nigerian diplomat. It wasn't a scam. They didn't close them, but after 17 minutes of me drilling them on a development call, we got all the information and figured out this was literally a Nigerian diplomat. We found him on Wikipedia and everything. So you never know, but it was fun. Like they were having fun with the challenge, and I was able to teach the lesson of you don't know who's on the other side until you at least test.
Well, you know what I love about that? You modeled the behavior. You know, you said, I'll get down there right with you. And that builds a lot of respect and credibility and trust, you know, with you as their leader. So kudos to you.
That's
Plus,
great.
it's fun doing that stuff.
Yeah.
I'd love to be back down there.
This is good, guys. We only have a few more minutes. We're going to wrap up here soon. There's one more question. So what is the pot of gold per se at the end of this rainbow? What benefits can I expect to realize when there is high accountability in the sales organization? So maybe, Ryan, do you want to start with that? And then we'll just do our close. Like everybody kind of, do you want me to read it again since I've been talking?
No, it's fine. I think I got the gist of it. It's, so the number one benefit is going to be one that is, I don't know, is necessarily so, apparent, but it's definitely, very important, which is high employee retention of your top performers. I mean, sales representatives want to work in competent, well-organized environments where the compensation plan is, makes sense, is not changing. And, they want to work in an accountable culture, because for a sales representative, these are all known quantities. And there's nothing that salespeople hate more than having to deal with unknown quantities. So that would be, what I would say is, is one of the primary benefits. And then I'll let our other panelists allude to some of the others.
I would just share some key words here. Scalability and reoccurring revenue. I think that those are two things that a well-run process like we've been kind of outlining would create for you, especially if those things are important to you.
Yeah, I think brand value is a huge piece. I mean, when you have salespeople that are accountable, they're advocates in the space, they represent your product, you should be able to see direct relation to your NPS if you're tracking that. It's the Jake from State Farm scenario. I mean, when you know that rep really cares and is accountable to their team as well as the product and the customer, that speaks way beyond just that firsthand experience. That is brand representation to the highest degree. So it really, beyond just revenue growth, beyond just scalability, this is about how you really shape your brand. Your salespeople are your front-facing force.
That's great. Thanks, Doug. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Can everybody leave their closing thoughts? Just 30 seconds, like a little overview. Oh, Doug doesn't want to go first. I saw his.
I just use access closing thoughts, and it's just a scary place up there. Something specific.
Okay, Ryan, why don't you go first?
Well, I'm just going to go back and tie, because I think this bears repeating, is that sales accountability is a conversation. Just like with any conversation, you need two parties engaged for it to make accountability real. But if you think that you can go in and direct accountability to happen, you're probably going to have difficulties.
Oh, that's good. Kristie?
I think my parting shot here would be, I think the ultimate accountability goal here is that that at some point, I as the leader or you as the leader aren't the master of accountability. That everyone starts to hold themselves accountable, that you've created a culture where I feel obligated to do what I say I'm going to do without even thinking about it. Like it's just part of the culture. And so I think the goal ultimately is that it's not something that I do with an individual contributor or a sales rep. It's that everybody holds themselves accountable. And that's, to me, that's the holy grail here that we're trying to reach. It's not easy to get to, but I think over time you can absolutely master that.
Great, thank you. Kim, do you want to go?
Yeah, I'm going to chime in from a little bit different viewpoint. I'm going to talk about the human and neuroscience. And when it comes to accountability, introducing these programs, but then also motivating. anybody who's really interested, look up SCARF, SCARF. This is by David Rock and the Neuro Leadership Institute. And in social situations, we perceive as humans, going back to our primitive brains, either threat or reward to our status, to our certainty, to our autonomy, to relatedness, to fairness. So when you introduce accountability, think about how do we structure this that somebody doesn't feel it's a threat to status or certainty, autonomy, relatedness, fairness. Again, enrolling your reps to be part of creating it will reward every single one of those. And then reinforce that being accountable is a reward in those areas. And just be mindful that if it feels like micromanaging or taking away autonomy, or I feel it's not fair, then it becomes a threat. So that's kind of my takeaway. Think about the human and how to meet humans where they are.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, David, and then Doug, and then I'll wrap up.
I think as we've talked today, I think one of the stronger points that underpins a lot of this is this concept of a working agreement. It involves two really important words, working and agreement. And so if you are in agreement with your teams about what expectations are when you work together, you're going to get a lot of value out of that. So if you don't have one, get yourself on a pace to get one or get multiple ones that link together that mirror the culture of your company, that don't have to be taught from scratch.
Thank you, Doug. Where's Doug? Oh, Doug, you're muted.
Yeah, I'm in virtual. If anybody noticed, I don't even know how to use a mute. Anyway, what I want to talk about here is meaningful. We really need to emphasize the word in the title. That's about value. It's not just about checks and balances. I mean, we talk about sales like we have to teach a bunch of sellers to be accountable. Everybody should want to and need to be accountable in general in life. It's what makes us better human beings. Providing meaningful accountability means showing them the value of being accountable as an organization. And so I've emphasized this a lot, but we treat these sales teams as like this separate unit. It's a company, it's an organization that's tied together. Sales is one part of it. So when you show value across the board, that should instill a sense of joy in that seller that equates to not just the revenue they bring in, but the people the company helps, the problems that company solves, and the growth of that company as well.
Thank you. Okay, guys, this was a great panel. I loved all of this. This is a great conversation. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to the audience members. We truly hope you found value in the panel. We welcome your feedback. Thank you to all the sponsors. Please reach out to all of us on LinkedIn. All the contact info is up here on the screen. Oh, actually, wait, no, it's not. We don't have emails up here, but you know what? We send out an email, a follow-up email, and all of the contact info will be on there. Please reach out to the panelists once that contact info comes out, or find them on LinkedIn. And also, I believe Christy Jones has a document she would like to share. If you want to access that for interviewing for accountability, reach out to her directly and just look for that email tomorrow with her contact info. So join us back here in 2 weeks on April 13th for a panel on how organizational alignment drives manufacturing profitability. It has been an honor to be your moderator, and see you all in 2 weeks.
Thanks, y'all.